So I'm going to hand over to Jo and Genevieve. So thank you very much for Genevieve joining us today, and I'll hand over to Jo.
Hi everyone, Kate's pretty much said it already. Genevieve is here to give us some of her expertise on using social media to its best advantage. It's one of those things that's so huge that everybody knows something that somebody else doesn't. So we can't possibly cover all of it. If you've got any hints or tips that you think Genevieve hasn't covered, stick them in a chat. They're always really useful. I'm learning constantly and I do it for a living. So I'm excited to see this as well. So thanks, Genevieve, and off we go.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Yeah, and I think social media is a bit of a dark art, really. And I think yeah, there's so many kind of complexities around algorithms and things that I think, yeah, like Jo says, even if you're, doing this as a job or you're doing this really regularly, actually, in the kind of the mainframe of social media, they do change the algorithm, and then that can affect how posts are noticed. So it's just a constant changing thing. But hopefully this evening I can take you through some hints, tips, approaches that can help you out. And it's about using social media, getting the best out of it, but also doing it on your terms. I think it's important, but it's not, it's not like the be all and end all. Use it in a way that works for you. And yeah, I'm going to take you through some approaches. Before I do that, I'm just going to introduce myself. Some of the names that I already know in the waiting room, and some of them I don't. So, hello to everyone, and thanks for making the time this evening. And thanks, I think, Lowestoft for inviting me to talk about social media this evening. So for those of you that don't know, my main work is as a community artist. I've been a freelance community artist for over 10 years now, working as self-employed practitioner, and I'm based in and I'm from Great Yarmouth. So I'm not from a marketing background, that isn't my training, but actually I've got lots of experience of using social media as a freelancer in my freelance work. So I've got lots of applied approaches, if you want to call it that way. So stuff that I've done in my work, stuff that I do, trial and error, test it out, see what works, pick up tips from other people. So hopefully I can share some of the things that I've picked up along the years of using social media in a professional capacity. So I use social media to talk about my own work. I work as a community artist, and I've also been paid in different roles for organisations and on projects to do social media. And it's also something that I've offered voluntarily, to offer my skills in social media to support a project, for example, or an organisation. That might be something that I would offer to kind of support things. And that's not saying I'm not offering myself this evening to do everyone's social media, but hopefully what I can offer is some hints and tips this evening. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how I use social media, as I say, in my arts practice, as a visual artist, for my freelance work and my community projects, and for other groups and organisations that I'm connected with, as I say, in a paid or voluntary capacity. So there's lots of different ways and lots of different contexts that I use social media. And I'm also going to be starting from the assumption this evening that you're already using social media in some way. I'm going to assume that you either use social media personally, or you've talked about your projects on social media, or in a more kind of professional capacity, you might be talking about maybe a venue that you run, or an exhibition that you've put on. I'm assuming that I'm not going to be talking about the basics about how to set up a profile. I'm assuming that you're already there. You might have a profile, or you might be looking to set up a kind of professional profile, but you are familiar with the kind of basics of social media. So I'm taking that assumption. And also just to say that this is about how to use social media in a kind of professional, sort of, in quotation marks way, to share or post about your work rather than about, what goes on in your, your private social media. That's your business. It's not about you as, on your kind of, your private Facebook that possibly isn't the place where you share all your work, but this is about the kind of front-facing public presence social media profiles, not your, what you do in your private. That's up to you. So yeah, as well as working as a community artist, as I say, I'm a visual artist. I have my own arts practice, and so I use the approaches that we're going to go through this evening to talk through my process and share my practice. So whereas an exhibition might be the kind of final outcome, if you like, actually I use the chance to share on my social media the processes, how I kind of work, and to be very generous, and also there's a mutual thing there. I get lots of inspiration from other people who are generous with their approaches as well. So to start, I'm going to be talking about the 4 main social media platforms that I use, why I use them and how I use them. So going into the kind of the detail of specific platforms, and kind of in order of preference, I don't know, maybe, but I'm going to start with Instagram. So Instagram is the most used social media profile for me. I find that I get I feel like maybe I'm just in a kind of demographic, because social media tends to be a slightly younger audience. It tends to be a sort of female audience. So I feel like, the algorithm's probably got me just right here. And so the stuff that I put on social media, Instagram basically gets the most kind of stuff for me. Maybe I'm just in this kind of algorithm, in the kind of mainframe of maybe a kind of Instagram sort of age bracket, sort of gender bracket, who knows. But it's the most used space for me. And as a visual artist, Instagram is completely visual. I kind of see that a bit as my kind of visual story of my practice and my work. And it gives a really good overview, because you've got that, it creates a grid. When you go onto a profile and you've got this grid of images, and it's almost like a portfolio, so that someone could, go onto your Instagram and see, this is kind of what you're about, and you can kind of see final works, you can see work in progresses. But I think for me, I kind of see it as almost like a sketchbook. So I'm not very good at keeping up with physical sketchbooks. That's not the way I practice as an artist. I don't document and, work in that way, although I'm a very organized person. But when it comes to my artwork, documenting it just, goes out the window. But something like Instagram, I use that as my tool to document my progress, even just for my own sake, actually. So I can kind of look back and think, oh, actually, that project's moved on to that project. That process inspired the next process. And it's when you kind of look on the grid, you've got this really good overall picture of your work. And obviously, you're putting that out there and other people can see it as well. I find I use Instagram as well to show a bit more of the kind of behind the scenes, the progress. So for example, in Instagram, you have your main images on the grid, and you also have something called stories, which is when you go on the profile, you can see the profile of my face is in the circle there. It's got a pink and orange ring around it. That says that there's a kind of story image, which is a 24-hour image which you can put up that then becomes invisible after 24 hours. It's a disappearing post, and sometimes, for example, if I'm working on a kind of slow photographic process, I might document all the little stages of that process. Or if I'm working with something like a dyeing process of dyeing with natural plants and pigments, and that's over several months, I might document all the kind of individual stages of that and put that in stories. And it's kind of like the behind the scenes, maybe the stuff that went wrong, the stuff that worked, the stuff that didn't. And then I might kind of summarize that for a post, and that final post will be on the grid. But the disappearing stories is like all the little kind of behind the scenes things that happened that led up maybe to that post being the kind of final version of the work. You can actually, although stories are 24 hours disappearing posts, you can actually capture onto them. So you can see on the kind of screen grab, there's also on the right of my screen, there's a series of those bubbles. So one says trash treasure, one says East CDE, which culture declares emergency, one says solar dying. Those little bubbles are stories that I've put up that I've then kind of gone back into them, and I've selected the stories that I want to keep on to, and you can put them into categories, and that stops them from disappearing, and they become visible on your front page. And these are called highlights. And so these are quite nice, that I kind of collect projects, and I collect processes as well. I've got a little stories highlight for cyanotype, I've got a stories highlight for anthotype, and all the different processes that I work in. And I also make story bubbles for specific projects that I'm working on. So for example, I'm working on a British Council funded project called Trash Treasure. So when I post in my stories about that, I'm collecting that in that little highlight bubble, so that people could go onto your profile and kind of see these little snapshot images. So yeah, that's the kind of way I use Instagram. So it's a visual sketchbook, good for showing behind the scenes, because you get this overall grid of what your practice is all about. I find it really good with connecting with kind of fellow artists, fellow creatives, and it tends to be a slightly younger audience and tends to be a female audience. This is all according to, you know, the kind of official Instagram data out there. And then I'm going to move on to Facebook. So another platform that I use fairly often to talk about my work, share projects I'm involved with. I find it's very particularly good for advertising events, because obviously Facebook has its own category of events. It has events listings, which is really good to build an audience, because your event becomes listed as part of you know, the whole kind of Facebook events kind of worldwide listing. So you could kind of click on categories and, you know, curate different things that you want to attend. So someone might go into the Facebook events listing and select art, you know, select Suffolk, etc. And then it you know, selects based on tags and categories. So it's a really good way of you know, I think getting events out there particularly, I found it really useful. And of course, when I'm talking about Facebook, I'm talking about a Facebook page, not your personal profile, you know, not you as, you know, whatever your name is, your personal profile. I'm talking about a Facebook page, that public facing page. So the way I use Facebook is, say, compared to Instagram, with Instagram, I was talking a lot about the kind of behind the scenes stuff that I share. I do a bit less of that on Facebook because of the posting format. With Facebook, you know, as you know, you scroll through and it's post to post, you know, your whole screen will be, you know, one post, and you scroll the page to see the next post. So you don't get as much context, you don't see as much of the bigger picture. And actually I find that the kind of behind the scenes kind of posts of my processes don't always sit as well. With Instagram, you get the whole context, you can kind of see every stage of a process, and you can kind of see the final outcome, you know, all in one on your grid. So yeah, I tend to use it to talk more about promotion of events, more about updates, and I find it's particularly good for connecting with people who might participate in the activities and the things that I put on. The audience tends to be slightly older age compared to Instagram, also tends to be a female audience. As I mentioned with Instagram, it has the stories, which is the disappearing posts. Facebook has its own version of that, but it's not so often used as Instagram. As you'll know, Instagram and Facebook are now, you know, the same company. Facebook bought Instagram. So there's a lot of this kind of merging and blurring of the kind of platforms and their distinctness. One of the good things that I think about Facebook is actually that you can pin posts. So, you know, when someone goes onto your professional front-facing, you know, portfolio, your page on Facebook, you can pin the post that you think is most important for people to see. And I find this really useful. You know, if you've got something in particular, you know, something that is maybe you need people to see, it might contextualize the work you do, it might announce something, it might point people to, you know, lots of web links or to your brochure or to details about your venue, or, you know, whatever it is. Pin in a post at the top of the page is a really good way to just, so people come to your page, you've kind of curated it a little bit more to show what, to kind of point people to the direction of what you want people to see first. So yeah, now I'm going to move on to Twitter, which is, I find a space which is a lot more conversational. So again, it's like slightly different. I'm kind of tweaking the content that I put out on here. And I find it's really good to find things like articles and thoughts about something, or, you know, research. It's kind of academic. It's a lot more the kind of thinking about the sector, you know, thinking about the cultural sector. You know, lots of research I find is I kind of see it pop up more on Twitter. You know, Twitter is so much about the words, you know. So with Instagram and Facebook, you know, they really rely on an image or a video to gain attention and gain traction and gain impact. And whilst that's generally true for Twitter, actually Twitter's always been about the words. You know, they would kind of a set amount of characters, you know, letters, and it's kind of the words that are really important on Twitter, I think. And again, like Facebook, you can pin posts. So if you had a post to say, you know, our new program's coming out, or, you know, book onto this series, or, you know, whatever it is, you can pin that post at the top of your profile again. So you're really trying to nudge people that come onto your page, come onto your Twitter profile, to say, you know, this is the thing that I want you to see first, which is really, really useful. So as I've got my list here, really good for kind of sending updates about what you're doing, but I think it's a lot more conversational. It'll be a lot more about the kind of research, the thoughts, the thinking, and again, it tends to be a younger audience, and, you know, according to the information that's out there, the split of, you know, gender is quite evenly divided. So I'm going to move now on to the fourth and final social media platform that I'm going to focus on, and then I'm going to be talking about some other ways to use social media. And I kind of ummed and ahed about adding LinkedIn into this. Yeah, I still this, like, I wouldn't even call it love hate. It's like complete almost indifference about LinkedIn. But I thought I would add it in because I was talking to someone about LinkedIn, and they were like, oh no, I actually found like jobs out of that. And, you know, there's someone who works in the arts cultural sector, and they were saying, you know, that they did find work through it. And I thought, well, okay, maybe it's me, I don't know, but it's the least updated you know, social media page for me. It's definitely somewhere where I wouldn't put my kind of work in progress. It tends to be, you know, about what I'm calling kind of professional accolades, posting the kind of outcomes, posting announcements of partnerships, announcements of funding. You know, it's the most kind of professional, shiny side, I think. So some people say it's good for professional networking. You know, in my experience, I don't know. I don't put a lot of effort in, which is maybe why I don't get a lot out of it. I don't know. But if I was going to drop one, then LinkedIn is probably the one that I wouldn't focus on, because I find that often the way I want to use social media is maybe to build audiences to participate in things. And actually, I know my audience isn't here. My audience isn't here on LinkedIn. But maybe if I was looking for partnerships and I was looking for, you know, that level of interaction with people, then maybe I would look here. So LinkedIn tends to, again, be a younger audience. It also tends to be a more male audience as well. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about LinkedIn. Yeah, there are other social media, well, then it's sort of not quite social media, but almost social media platforms that I use or have used that I just wanted to mention. So there's 4 more that are just going to get a mention now. So one is Mailchimp Newsletters. So that's not technically a social media site, but it is about, you know, audience building. It's a way that you can collect emails from people. You can link it up with your social media so that, for example, you've got your Facebook page. You can make it so that there's a button on there that says sign up to newsletter, integrated into Facebook. That information can then get collected by Mailchimp. And there you are, you're building your email list for clients or participants. But obviously with Mailchimp, if you're going to add anyone's email address to a list, you must seek permission first. It's really important. We have GDPR guidelines that are, really fixed about people's data, so you must ask permission. The second one I'm going to mention is YouTube. I have quite limited experience. It doesn't typically fit my portfolio of work, actually. I make still images, although some of the projects that I've worked in do have a video outcome. I've hosted them on Vimeo, which is another platform that just looks a bit nicer when it's embedded on a website. But yeah, if you're working in video, places like YouTube, places like Vimeo are great. But for me, that just doesn't really fit. And again, it's about kind of selecting what does fit, your work, your audience. You don't have to be across everything if it's just, not relevant. Another thing is, so the last two are my blog and my website. So my blog sits on my website. It's not social media, but everything kind of points to that. So my blog is on my website. It's where I talk more about a project. Perhaps I have a, kind of an extended word count, if you like, compared to the same more sort of abbreviated content that I might put on social media. Then I might point a link to my blog saying, read more, to kind of point people over to my website to gain a bit of traction on that. And then, of course, my website, all my social media points to my website. So on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, you can add a web link in your bio. So you can add one link. And for me, that one link is always my website. Websites are more static and they're more sort of portfolio-like. So they're more like an archive. And actually your social media is where, everything you do can kind of come to life, really, be a bit more lively, a bit more conversational, more creative. So I'm going to now move on to talk about different techniques that you can use basically across all platforms. So different ways to use social media, different approaches, maybe that hopefully might save you time, make what you're doing more efficient, make what you're doing more impactful and more useful. So the first one I'm going to move on to is post scheduling. So post scheduling, in case you haven't used it before, it's simply when you will pre-plan a time and a date for a post to go out, and you can do Facebook and Instagram on the same platform. As I say, they're owned by the same company. If you link them, you can schedule your post to go out on Facebook and on Instagram sort of simultaneously through the same platform. And Twitter, when you're writing in Twitter, there's a little sort of calendar and a clock button that you can click to set the time. So I'm just going to go through now what I think are the kind of pros and cons of pre-scheduling posts, pre-scheduling social media. So I do use pre-scheduling, but I tend to use it more with projects and with organizations rather than with my arts practice side of things. So it's more in a kind of a professional promotional way than it is about when I'm posting about my own arts practice. So I think the benefits of scheduling is that it could be more time efficient. So you might be really busy, have a kind of up and down schedule as a freelancer, as people who run venues, as people who, put on events, as people who have a kind of portfolio career and all sorts of freelancing work. Your own personal life schedule, work schedule might be really varied. So it might be more efficient for you to schedule posts so that when you are busy, you're not having to worry about, oh, I must, put something up on social media when your schedule just isn't allowing you the time, the space, the effort, the energy to do it. I was talking to a friend about this, saying that I was doing this session, and she said that actually she spends more time when she does pre-schedule a post, drafting up the post, than when she was just going to write it and post it. So, I mean, it depends, that was her point of view. My point was more, for me, it feels more time efficient. It's just kind of, I guess if you've got that time ahead of you thinking, well, this is going to go out on Tuesday, you might sort of labour more, out of the point. You might think, is this really what I want to say to the world on a Tuesday? It's kind of a personal thing, but I find it can be quite time efficient. My schedule's, really varied. And so it works for me sometimes to pre-schedule posts around a kind of flexible ad hoc freelancing life. Scheduling can be beneficial if you are being quite strategic with targeting specific audiences. So, for example, on Facebook Business Suite, which if you link your Instagram to, you can post through, as you can see on the screenshot on the screen, you can see that where it says create post, you can see that it's got both my Facebook page and my Instagram page. That's linked. So I've gone into Facebook, and there's a section called Facebook Business Suite. I can select to post both on Facebook and Instagram at the same time, or on Instagram. That's how you can pre-schedule on Instagram or Facebook simultaneously. They're the same company. You can do, I think scheduling is good for that, for if you're targeting a specific audience. So for example, when you are scheduling on Facebook, it comes up with suggested times and dates based on algorithms. So it's kind of doing the work for you. So you don't so much have to go into the Facebook insights. I hardly ever look at the insights and think, I'm quite happy to either just, choose a time that I can kind of see things work. For me, sometimes between 5 and 6 p.m. for my audience seems to work on a weekday. That's not a hard and fast rule that I can say everyone posts your posts 5 and 6 p.m. on a weekday, because your audience might be very different to mine. That's what tends to work for me. I kind of play around with it. But if you are, strategically targeting a particular audience that, I don't know, are like early risers, and that 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning they're going to be on their phone scrolling with their breakfast, but actually you like to lay until 10, why are you going to get yourself up why are you going to get yourself up early when you can use Facebook scheduler, right? So I find Facebook scheduling, Instagram scheduling, Twitter scheduling really good for keeping work boundaries. Actually, you don't have to be active on social media for your posts to be going out there. It can be a really good way to set your boundaries. So for example, you might want to stop your working day at 5 o'clock, and actually, if your audience is really active, later in the evening, you shouldn't have to use your evenings or use your early mornings or whenever. If it's your day off, that doesn't mean that your content couldn't be going out there when you need to kind of keep your own work boundaries. Schedule your posts up ready to keep your time sacred. So a couple of people have asked me about scheduling posts on Instagram. So hopefully that answered it, in that if you go onto Facebook Business Suite and you link your Instagram account, you can go into Facebook Business Suite and you can tick both Facebook and Instagram if the account is linked, and get those posts scheduled across both platforms. So scheduling is great, but it's also not great. And these are the ways that it's not great. So obviously, if all your content is going out pre-scheduled, it can kind of come across as quite stagnant. It can come across as like stuff can just become out of date, you know, like what you're posting about might just really miss the mark. You know, if you're scheduling really far in advance, you might really miss the mark. It might look quite generic. It's obviously lacking interaction. What you're doing then is just broadcasting, and you're not interacting. You know, social media isn't a one-way street, you know, to just announce things, you know, in a kind of pre-formatted format. It's a space for conversation as well, you know, because there are like buttons, there are comment buttons, there are share buttons, you know. Actually, it's a kind of tool, and how you use it, I guess, determines kind of quality of stuff that's happening on there. So, you know, use it to support people, use it to build a community. But if you're just broadcast, you know, that's boring. That's, you know, that's not going to land, right? So, so I use a mix. Basically, I use a little bit of scheduling, a little bit of just stuff going out, you know, in the moment. But for projects and organizations, I tend to schedule posts in a kind of a format like, I think it really works. So say if you're doing like meet the artists or meet the team type posts, you know who's going to be involved in a project or an organization. So you can just kind of, you know, drip feed out, you know, the profiles of the different people you work with, for example. Or if you have, you know, your annual events program, you can just kind of drip feed out highlights of the events and point people to, you know, the booking link. But then have, you know, that live content, as it were, interspersed. You know, this is stuff that's happening, you know, here we are, we had a great day, you know, in between, to kind of give it a bit more life to it, really. So Miles just asked about when I post on Instagram, do I do it for my mobile or my PC? Well, a bit of both, really. So if I'm pre-scheduling, I'm on my computer, I can't pre-schedule from my phone. I just find the screen's too small. But just, it's hard work. Basically, it's hard work. So I would sit at my laptop if I'm pre-scheduling, and I think, right, what do I want to go out and when? So if I'm pre-scheduling, I'll do it on my computer. But yeah, if I'm just doing stuff that I've taken a photo and I just want to send it, I'll just do that straight off my phone. Facebook Business Suite, is it on your phone view? I might be able to find out. But Joe's posted a really handy tool in the chat if anyone wants to take a look at that. You let me just think off the top of my head. I think I downloaded Facebook Business Suite as a separate app on my phone. So it's not actually in the main Facebook app, but if you look up Facebook Business Suite, it should be able to, and also look up what Joe's popped in there as well. So yeah, that's scheduling. I use a mix of, I find it can be useful, but not too much, and it's just like a bit boring, you know. There we are. Okay, so I'm now going to just talk about accessibility, because obviously everything you do, you know, you're choosing the right platform, you're choosing the right content to go out at the right time, you know, you're kind of crafting your message to the world to try and, you know, hit the right time on the right day. But if it isn't accessible, then you know, what's the point? So so here is my example of just a really poor hashtag example. Yeah, when all the words just get mashed together and there's no capitalization of words in a hashtag, it just does my head in. So I don't use a screen reader to you know, as an access tool, but I cannot make head nor tail of hashtags when it's, you know, words strung together without a capital letter to kind of decipher the words. And so that's a kind of, that's an accessibility factor. Is that yeah, if you are putting hashtags together and they have multiple words in them, then please capitalize the beginning of each letter. It just makes it easier for screen readers to decipher. And also, you know, it just is a bit clearer. Secondly, on accessibility, please add image descriptions wherever possible. This is something that is, you know, actually I've just quite recently started doing. It's something that I've been learning about. So what I mean by that is in Facebook and Instagram, in the main body of text, or in Twitter under add description, when you upload a picture in Twitter, it suggests you add description at the bottom, or in Facebook and Instagram, just in the bottom of the post text, I would add in an image description. And what I mean by that is a verbal description of the visual image that you are seeing. So for example, I might put, you know, square brackets, image description, colon. So this is one that I used recently. So I put as my image description, this is a verbal description of what you're visually seeing on a post. So photo of a shoreline curved like a letter C, from left to right, lines of dried grass, stones, sticks and seaweeds, and in the wet mud flat on the right, small clumps of short grass and seaweed. So that was an image description of a shoreline. And so it's literally just writing out, you know, what the image is. An image description is useful for people who have impairment issues, people who use screen readers, so that they can access the content. So, you know, although social media is very, you know, heavily visual, all those kind of things can just help it be more accessible. Thirdly, if you are using videos on social media, you can add subtitles and you can add captions. So some platforms support this automatically, and I believe that Facebook and I believe that YouTube, there's an option to add in captions. So if you are putting any videos, as much as possible, do add the captioning and the subtitling on the screen, again, for accessibility. And fourth is, although I do love an emoji, I'm a millennial, it's, you know, it's kind of what I've been brought up on. Don't overdo the emojis, okay? Don't overdo the number of you know, tags. Don't overdo the number of hashtags in a post. That's, you know, something that I've been researching into how to make social media content accessible. And actually one of the things that always comes up is kind of too many emojis, too many too many hashtags. So what I tend to do is have my main body of text, which is, you know, the kind of message that I want to send out. I might dot it with a couple of emojis, maybe at the end of the sentences. I will then, in the same post text, I'll have my image description, you know, a couple of sentences verbally, just, you know, written out kind of what the image is describing. I'll then put my hashtags and my tags. And they say that 11 is a good number for hashtags. I don't know. This is just what an algorithm, you know, some clever person who's looked into this says 11 is a good number for hashtags. Just, you'll have to take their word on it. I don't know. So yeah, so now just thinking about, so maybe you've kind of chosen the right platform. You know, maybe with Instagram, it's a bit more about your kind of behind your scenes and your processes. Maybe on Facebook, there's a bit more content about events. Maybe on Twitter, there's a more kind of conversational approach. Maybe on LinkedIn, it's, you know, whatever they do on LinkedIn. Maybe you've got a mix of scheduled posts. Maybe you've got a mix of live posts that are going out, and you've made sure that your content is accessible. You've capitalized each letter on your hashtags. You've just, you know, described what the image is. If you've added a video, you've put captions on as much as possible. You've not overdone it with the emojis. And then it comes down to the kind of crux of what social media is so much about, which is images. So social media is all about images, all about good quality images. And by quality, I'm not putting a kind of value judgment on the content. I'm simply saying good quality images are about making sure that, even a camera, camera phones now are, and I say this as someone, with a background in photography degree and studying photography for many years. I don't have a camera. My camera phones are blooming amazing. They're just incredible. Like the quality of the camera is brilliant. So what I mean by good quality images is really nice and clear imagery, really good lighting. If you're posting videos, make sure that, if there's sound included, that the sound is nice and clear. With the videos, it's really good to have kind of shorter clips. Everyone's got such short attention spans nowadays. Short clips tend to work well on social media. And so images are especially important with Instagram, because it's all about that image that builds up a kind of bigger picture of your grid. And this is kind of like, I sort of see it as like building your portfolio, building your kind of visual style of your images, which give a kind of sense of who you are as an artist, or what you're about as an organization, or, what the kind of things you have at your venue, or, whatever it is that your creative practice is that you're talking about on social media. The images are key. And if you are sharing someone else's image or someone else's work, always credit them. Make sure that you tag them in, the @ symbol, you type the @ symbol in and on your phone, on your computer, and it starts to kind of suggest. But do make sure that you look up that person first, because, tagging the wrong person, it could be a bit of a pain. So just make sure, I think once you've used it a couple of times, I think if you start to type it in, it'll make a kind of suggestion, a bit like, when you type in an email address in, and if you've emailed that person before, it starts to make a suggestion. But if you're tagging in someone for the first time, do check that it is the right person that you are tagging in. So yeah, tag them in if you're using someone else's images, so that they can be notified, that they know, and you're, doing the kind of generous thing to credit other practitioners' work. It's a generous thing. And so to also think about images, I'm just also going to, as I was just talking about tagging people in, is I'm just going to talk about hashtags. So hashtags are part of a really complicated social media algorithms that's changing, that's complex, that no one seems to kind of know head nor tail of. But think of hashtags as like the keywords that's going to get your content, your images notified. So some people follow specific hashtags. Some people might be following, hashtag Lowestoft, because they want to see, all about what people are talking about Lowestoft on social media, for example. But there's a couple of ways that you can use hashtags, which are really linked to the imagery that you're putting out. So for example, you might use hashtags to describe the image or the content in the broader sense. So for example, just taking that middle image of the fruit on the grass, it might be, hashtag foraging, hashtag grass, hashtag oak leaf, capital O, capital L for leaf, hashtag apple, hashtag, whatever, you're kind of describing the image in the kind of broader sense. And then you might want to use hashtags which are really specific to an event, an organization, or a program, which has been used across other marketing as well, which links all the content together. So for example, hashtag the leading light, hashtag think Lowestoft is obviously something that is used across Think Lowestoft's, East Suffolk Council, their marketing, and it links all the content together. So you will see those hashtags on their posters, on their social media. It's linking it together. They're only useful if they're being used. If you're making up random hashtags every time, it's like a keyword, like who's looking up, you know, these kind of like really random long hashtags, unless you're going to like keep using that as your hashtag. There's no point just chucking it in like, for the sake of it. So there's also things on social media that you can really kind of broaden your content of your, you know, broaden the amount of sort of impact your content and images are having. If you link to what I'm calling kind of like social media specific things, like things that no one would really do in real life, but they do on social media, like hashtag Throwback Thursday. So on Thursdays in the world of social media, for some people, some reason, people seem to get really reminiscent. And then on Mondays, it's hashtag Monday Motivation. So on Mondays, everyone in the land of social media starting off the week with this, you know, motivational posts and inspiration. So there are things like that, which, you know, can obviously, if you're posting relevant content that is about, you know, reminiscent things on a Thursday, or, you know, inspiring things on a Monday, that can really kind of help to elevate your posts, if you want to do that sort of thing. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, they say 11 hashtags are good. I think a good tip is to look up what other people are using, you know, other people who might be your peers or similar venues to your own, or, you know, you don't want to, you know, copy people's work, but take in inspiration, look up examples. As I say, they're only useful if they're being used, you know, they're a keyword really. If they're not really being used, then there's no point adding them in. But always important to remember, keep it accessible. So if you've got a string of words in the same hashtag, capitalize the first letter of each word. You know, for example, hashtag think Lowestoft, capital T for think, capital L for Lowestoft. It keeps it accessible for people who use screen readers. Right. Just have a sip of my drink. Okay, so as part of this, I put out on social media that I was invited by Think Lowestoft to put this session together to talk about social media from an artist perspective, about things that you do as artists, as arts organisations. And I was given permission by the people whose quotes you can see on the screen and that I will read out in case your screen's not clear enough for those quotes to be seen. But here's some thoughts from other artists as well, other creatives who use social media in different ways. And this is what they said. So from the top left, so Hannah Eyre, she's a participatory artist based in Scotland. And she does really amazing, really beautiful, colourful work. Anyway, she said, find your people. That was her kind of, that was her point to suggest for this session. So she said, all the arty folk seem to be on Instagram, but all the heritage crew I want to connect with are hanging out on Twitter. Facebook just shows your stuff to 10 fans, most of who you're related to. So kind of her thing is also about really kind of curating your content. So as I was saying earlier, for me, Instagram seems to get, you know, quite good hits. It's showing a lot of my behind the scenes stuff. And she said there's lots of, you know, there's lots of a big kind of art community on Instagram. And then, as I was saying earlier, you know, Twitter tends to be a lot about the kind of research, maybe the academic, the conversational. She said for her, actually, that's where our kind of heritage community is, on Twitter. And as I said earlier, you know, Facebook, I find it really good for events and things, but I wouldn't probably show my kind of behind the scenes. It doesn't feel like worth my effort to kind of put energy into doing that, because it doesn't seem to land as well. And she said for her, you know, seems like what she's saying is that the kind of Facebook is not really spreading, you know, the word of her practice very, very well. And then on the right, Soraya, she runs a social enterprise called All the Elements, which is about accessibility in the outdoors. And she works nationally in the UK. And she said that she actually set up a completely separate Instagram account where she's just following arts accounts. So she's kind of made this space for herself so she can just immerse herself in the creative inspiration. As I say, her day job is about accessibility in the outdoors, but she's got a whole separate account for, you know, her arty side. And I guess that's kind of like, you know, if you've got a whole separate project, actually, does it sit properly, really, on your own Facebook or your own Instagram or your own Twitter? Or actually, does it just kind of deserve the place for its own identity, you know, to have its own account? And then in the middle, someone says that pre-scheduling posts, you know, someone's a fan of that, and they actually do it at different times of day for different platforms, and that's kind of how that they're kind of playing with that. So she, you know, Jackie Jones, she says that, you know, she might put something 9 a.m. on Twitter, but actually put it 5 p.m. on Facebook and vice versa, and actually kind of spread the audience and play with things, you know, popping up at different times to catch different audiences. As we know, it's a different group of people who are using Twitter to Instagram to Facebook. So how are you going to catch them? Maybe by spreading out different times posting. And Jackie also says on the right, not to dismiss Facebook and Twitter as marketing tools. She says that the shares and the retweets that you get through putting things on Facebook and Twitter can be really useful, which, you know, it's great. Other people can kind of echo what you say. And she says, when you go into Facebook and you go into the publishing tools, which sits within the business suite, so we spoke about that a bit earlier, go into Facebook, you know, on your computer, go into business tools. There's a bit called the business suite, sorry. Once you're in business suite, there's a bit called publishing tools, and you can actually view that impact. So, you know, if you really wanted to go into kind of granular detail of testing, you know, what does a 9 a.m. post look like versus a 5 p.m. post, you're welcome to do that if you've got, you know, the time and the energy. And then on the bottom left, Mary Blue Brady, she's kind of talking about the kind of ethos that she goes into social media. So she's a really positive, generous person. She talks about trying to be really positive. So actually, she says she only posts positive things. So she wants to keep our social media as a space, you know, like a positive, creative, supportive, generous, open space, which is great. You know, actually, there's so much, you know, there is so much bile on social media. And there is, you know, if you go down that route, you know, you can find lots of things to kind of entertain your dark side if you very wish. But actually, you know, Mary's choosing to be really supportive, being creative, and being open and generous, which is very much in her spirit. So yeah, I've got some takeaway thoughts just to consider, and just some kind of final things that I wanted to share with you. And then what we can do is kind of open up for questions. So if you haven't been already, then please put questions in the chat. Some of them I've been answering as we go along. There's a chat and there's a Q&A button as well. So please pop them in there. Anything that's springing to mind, anything that you want me to recap. But I am just going to go through just some kind of takeaway thoughts that I wanted to kind of pass on this evening. So social media is two-way. So as I said earlier about scheduling, you know, if you were to only just broadcast and schedule, you would, you know, it would be really static, and actually that would affect engagement and impact, and it would just become a kind of waste of your time. So do mix your scheduled posts with live posts that happen, you know, more sporadically, and do connect and contribute to others. You know, actually, if you find, you know, what someone's doing is really interesting or really intriguing, or you've got questions, then, you know, ask them, post them, you know, like what they're doing or share what they're doing, and, you know, show a bit of interest, because it, you know, when you're putting your work out there and yourself out there, it is quite exposed. I think it does take a level of bravery to kind of share, you know, your process and what you're doing. And, you know, because I think a lot with arts practice, a lot of that, you know, speaking as my experience of, you know, being a visual artist, it is, you know, your work is kind of, I don't know, linked to you, and it does sometimes feel personal. You're expressing your view on the world, your take on the world. You know, so be kind. You know, take Mary's advice in the previous post there. Be positive, be kind. You know, be supportive to people. You know, if what's that saying? If you ain't got anything nice to say, you know, shut up, or you know. Yeah. So also do it on your terms. So yeah, your stuff might not look like my stuff. You know, me saying things work well at sort of 5 or 6 o'clock on a weekday, that might not work for your audience. You know, that the way I schedule posts, or the kind of, you know, the content I do, you know, do it in a way that works for you. Find the way that works for you, but also don't let it take over. You know, it's just one element of, you know, what we do as creative practitioners, and what it means to kind of run a venue, run an organization, you know, or whatever it is we do. It is one element of that. It can be important. It can generate work. You know, I definitely get work from people saying, you know, oh, I really love that project that you did. Would you like to do it, you know, here, or could we go for funding to do something? It definitely generates work, but I think it's really important to have your boundaries. That's where things like the scheduling can come in. Yeah. And I think lastly, you know, make it clear, make it engaging, but make it accessible. I think it's got to be really accessible. You know, sort out them hashtags, make sure they've got capital letters on them. Don't overdo the emojis. Use the accessibility tools and methods to express what you do, and then that way, you know, your content is going to, you know, hit with a kind of the widest audience possible. But yeah, it's got to be about you. You know, no one could ever say like, you have, you know, put this image at this time, this hashtag on it. It's not as kind of prescriptive as that. You know, it's about you, your practice, your venue, your organization. It's, you know, kind of what you want to put out there. So generally, my feelings about social media are quite positive, actually. I find it really beneficial to meet kind of inverted commas, my peers, you know, people who are working in a similar way to myself, or people who are working in completely different ways that I would never get to meet or see the work of maybe in real life, especially the last couple of years. But it's really, I find it really stimulating and inspiring to be introduced to interesting ideas and arts practices. I also find it as a really useful evaluation tool. So in a kind of formal evaluation way, I point funders to project pages. You know, they're kind of a document of a project, you know, something that you've delivered. It's a really good way of, you know, sending that link, and you've got a document then of something that maybe you've delivered as a project if you've got funding for. But more informally, as an evaluation tool, I find it really useful to review stages of my practice, or review ideas I've had and how they've kind of come out in the world. I sometimes sort of scroll through and kind of think, oh, what was I doing? You know, because a lot of my work is very seasonally engaged. I sometimes look back and think, well, what was I doing in that spring, or what was I doing at that period of time? And actually, it gives me inspiration to kind of to build on, because as I say, I'm not really a sketchbook person, but actually I kind of use Instagram a bit like a sketchbook. It's positive because it's about building a community. You know, you can, as someone said, Hannah said in the quote there, she said, you know, find your people. Building a community is important. And also, lastly, before we go on to the Q&A, actually, I think social media can feel like a really powerful way for self-representation. Finding kind of sub-communities, and when I use the word sub, I don't mean lower, I mean, but as in smaller groups within a mainstream group. So, for example, there are lots of groups within social media and lots of kind of sharing and generosity around kind of smaller groups and communities that maybe work in the arts. So, for example, disabled artists and working class artists and, you know, regional groups. That, yeah, you can kind of find your community, but on a more on terms that are right for you. So yeah, I realized that was, you know, there was a lot to digest there over that over that past hour. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I can see that there are lots of questions. Okay, if you want to ask me lots of questions.
Yeah. Okay, so we do have quite a lot of questions. So what I will do is I will start with the Q&A box first, because I can see that we've had a question sitting there for quite a while. So Hugh has asked, do you use a tick list on Instagram bio to overcome the single bio link? I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this, because we do use something on Lowestoft. So I'll see what you have to say, and then.
No, I don't. So is that like that's like Linktree? Is that?
I think it might be like Linktree, yeah.
So I don't actually. What I tend to just point people to my website, and then I guess because my website's got, you know, my overall portfolio, it's got some my arts practice, it's got my community practice, it's got my blog. It kind of, that's got all the stuff that I think people would need. It's got my email address on it, you know. So I don't, and I haven't used that, although I have looked into using Linktree. I know some people find it really useful, but I don't think I need to, because I feel like my website kind of holds what everything else I need to point to. So I haven't used it.
So from our point of view, so we use Linktree for our Twitter and for our Instagram page. And the reason for that is purely because with Think Lowestoft, we have quite a lot of partners that we work with. You know, it makes more sense for, obviously, it probably makes more sense for you to have just the singular, you know, link to your website. But for us, we have a link to our East Suffolk Council website, because they have a lot of things like grants that are available. So it's always a good idea to have that link for us, just so we can direct people on an Instagram post, because obviously with Instagram posts, you can't put a link on there, unlike Twitter and Facebook. And we obviously have a lot of content we post. But we also have a link to our East Suffolk Council YouTube. We have a link to our Think Lowestoft website as well. So if you haven't seen that yet, then please do look at that. So yeah, that's kind of the reason that we use Linktree. And I'm sure there's quite a lot of other websites that are out there that provide that facility. But I think Linktree is quite useful because you get to you can choose your own username basically, and then you could have additional ones. So if you had several companies that you sort of oversee, or organizations or community groups that you oversee, then you could create a username for each one, and then just sort of update that way. So yeah, we find that quite useful, and it's completely free as well, which is great. And it seems to be that you can put quite an unlimited amount of post links on there. So yeah, so I hope that's answered your question, Q. So I'm just going to have another quick look. So Karen has asked, do emojis actually serve any purpose?
Well, good question. Probably not, but I think they look nice. I really like using, you know, if I'm talking about going for a walk, I really like using a leaf, or, you know, I just think it makes it look pretty. I don't think there is any purpose. Obviously, if you were using a screen reader would, you know, an accessibility tool would kind of translate, you know, the words into, you know, like out, you know, out loud, and a screen reader would just read things like as, you know, leaf emoji, as falling leaf, as waterfall, as flower, you know, and actually it wouldn't come across, but on a kind of accessibility point of view. But in terms of them having a use more generally, no, but they look good, I think, is my answer.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the next question. So Malcolm said, I've been told that it's better to actually comment rather than just like other people's posts. Does this increase engagement?
Yeah, I think it does all help. I know that quite recently Instagram sort of fiddled about with their algorithm, but I think I guess the most effective thing you could do would be to do both, really, to like it and then make a comment. A comment boosts the engagement, because then you're getting this, someone's getting a direct notification. I mean, they do with a like, but then it kind of invites their response, and their response then kind of that ripples another kind of boost for that post, because you've got the post going up, that's obviously going to appear on people's feed. You've got the fact that you are commenting, that's going to trigger on anyone who's following, you know, you or your feed. And you've got that person replying, again, it kind of pops that post coming up. You know, what it's doing is kind of triggering that post to appear in the feed, you know, as you're commenting on it, as that person is replying it, more than maybe, you know, a like would. It happens once, but if there's a kind of conversation happening, anyone who's following that page, it kind of, you know, is popping that page notification that something's happening on this post up more.
Excellent, thank you. And then Malcolm has also got a follow-up question. Do you have a view on sponsored posts on Instagram? And I suppose this could actually expand to Facebook as well, and Twitter.
Well, I accept that it's, I think for some people it would be maybe an income stream that, you know, you might be paid to, is that what you're referring to, where you are being paid to post like an advert, or are you talking about as in paid, like you are paying to make the post come up more?
I would imagine it's we would be paying for a post, just
like
sort of looking at this.
I mean, I just accept that, you know, social media, it's free because you're exchanging your data, and part of exchanging your data is that you're exposed to advertising. So I mean, it's not something that I would do. I don't think anyone would, I don't know what I would be sponsored for. I don't know, like got blue tack in my hand, like, you know, blue tack are listening. Like, I mean, it probably isn't the route that I would go down. But I, you know, I don't mind. It's probably a job for some people, isn't it, that have, you know, massive followings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it might be worth bringing Jo in at this point if she's available, just because I know that Jo does work with paid posts occasionally, and I don't know if Jo might have a view on this.
I was literally just typing out a response to that. So I think one of the things that we can do after this particular workshop is I'm doing a workshop on e-commerce, and if you're actually selling your wares and your art, that's a whole other dark art of social media. So if you do sell art or ceramics or anything that you produce that you need to promote online, I do a lot of work with artists where I build them a website and then we take their social media through. And again, Mailchimp, which Genevieve mentioned earlier, is really, really important in e-commerce and building your audiences, and, you know, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Christmas, all those ways of selling things and funneling and making that sales funnel is something we're covering in that. This is very much an overview. So if you're interested in doing that, please keep an eye out on everything that we do on social media. Sign up for our e-newsletter and you'll hear about the next one, and I'll be doing that. I'll save Genevieve a bit of time here because I've just seen somebody popping up and saying, how long do you spend on this? Personally, I look after about 14 different social media feeds, which is a huge amount. Some of them are dormant, you'll be pleased to hear. But what I tend to do is pick a time of the week. Monday morning is the one that I do, because I tend to find that I get quite anxious that I'm not posting on social media because it's such an important tool. If I've done it on Monday morning, I can spend the rest of the week reacting to things. So Monday morning, I sit down, I open up my business suite and I open up a calendar, which is in that Meta business suite. And you can have a look at each day of the week and think, okay, I need to promote this particular event that I've got going on or something that I'm doing. And I'll pick a day on Twitter, a day on Instagram, a day on Facebook, slightly tweaking each of those posts across all of those. And that really helps me spend the rest of the week actually just reacting to things that happen on social media, because that's where the joy is actually, isn't it? Is when you go, yay, somebody's engaged with me and that's really nice. I can have a conversation with them. Knowing I've got that underlying schedule in there really, really helps me, and probably will do with you guys. But we can do much more of a deep dive into e-commerce and helping with that a bit later on. So I'll shut up now and let Genevieve take over.
Thanks, Jo. So we do have another question. Do you create one post and share it across all platforms, or do you create something unique for each? Obviously, Twitter has text character limitation.
Okay, so sometimes, yes, I will make one post and it might be about something that I feel like is going to fit across all social, platforms. Saying like announcements, say, I'm working in partnership with this person, and it's going to be funded by X, and here's a pretty picture of describing it. The same text would go on Facebook, the same text would go on Instagram. I'll normally schedule those first, then I will do the kind of hard editing job, thinking what's the most pertinent point of this to then go over on Twitter. But it'll be the same image. If there's a web link, it'll be the same link. I'm still tagging in the same organization. So it's essentially the same content, but obviously with Twitter, it's a shortened version. But then I might also do extra posts. I might also do extra posts on Instagram, which is more about, here's my kind of work in progress that actually I'm not putting on Twitter, I'm not putting on Facebook. That tends to be where I put more of the kind of behind the scenes stuff. So I'm just making it just for Instagram. It's just a kind of quick, kind of 10 minutes of like, this is what I've been up to. This is how this process went, and so there's kind of those extra posts might go onto Instagram, which show a bit more, as I mentioned, like the kind of behind the scenes.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got two other questions, and I think there might be a little bit of a crossover here. So what I'll do is I'll read both of them out, because I think one is more looking at sponsored posts, but I think one is also referring to sort of algorithms and stuff, and I know there is a little bit of a crossover there. So Malcolm, just with regards to one of his previous questions, he says, I see a lot of sponsored posts where I guess the poster has paid for wider coverage. Would this just mark me up to Instagram or similar as someone who is prepared to pay, and therefore reduce the spread that my regular posts would get? And then we have another one from Miriam, and it says, how come some people's Instagram stories always appear first and stay long for a longer period? The example is not my regular contact. In fact, I noticed that even after I've looked at his story, is there an algorithm? Is there an algorithm involving, and maybe is this person editing quite often to keep the story live, or is there another explanation? But I think it is just down to, personally, I think that's probably down to the algorithms. Like Genevieve mentioned earlier, Instagram is constantly changing their algorithms, so you might just get used to the way that they've done it for a few months, and then they change it again. So but yes, I'll hand back over to you, Genevieve.
I think that sounds like this kind of the algorithm. Maybe for some reason, just to answer Miriam's question about, that person that keeps popping up, it might be that for whatever reason, Instagram thinks that that's the kind of person based on your activity, based on who else you're following, based on what you're posting, that feels like for whatever reason, that's the person that your content links most, that you're kind of would likely be most engaged with. And then obviously if you then are going on to his post and looking at it, well then you're you probably are doing that, even if maybe Instagram's nudged you into that. And in terms of posts staying around for longer than 24 hours, if you're seeing it on the story bubble on the feed, it could be that they're reposting things. It could be just they're reposting the same thing. Maybe if they're trying to promote, something. It could just be that they keep popping it up, every day, every couple of days. So it looks like it's the same thing, but they're probably reposting it. And about Malcolm, I'm just going to read back through that about these little sponsored posts. So they've paid for coverage. This is when you pay like a paid ad, essentially. I don't know how the algorithm it's like the Matrix, isn't it, would respond to that, but maybe Jo, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I mean, paying for a, don't ever boost a post, it's an absolute waste of money. You really need to go into the ad suite, and again, we can cover that in another workshop. That's a 2-hour workshop on its own. Paying for advertising on Facebook and Instagram is the only way to beat the algorithm, okay? They will boost your content and put it in front of more people because you've paid for it. Anybody that tells you they can beat the algorithm on Facebook or Instagram it's snake oil. It's just don't believe it. It's not possible. If anybody could do that, they'd be extremely rich indeed. And Facebook is a very powerful company. They've got a lot of people working so that you don't know how to beat the algorithm. So the only way to do it Malcolm, and what you're seeing is, yes, if it says sponsored, it means that it's flagging up to you that somebody's paid for this content. So everything that you've ever looked at on social media is creating adverts that are being funneled towards you. And if you pay for that content yourself, then that's exactly what will happen as well. It's a really, really powerful tool. And if you sell product, then I would guarantee that it will really, really help you. But as I say, that's a whole other thing to cover. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
And just in regards to the last part of your question, Malcolm, my understanding is that if you pay for it once or twice, I don't believe that is going to affect how many people see your posts regularly. They're not going to sort of reduce your audience, so to speak, just because you've paid for it previously and they want you to keep paying. So it is, like Joe said, it is a boost, but don't use the boost function. So then we have got another question from Jenny, and this is a little bit of a technical one, so might need some more investigation, I'm not sure. So she has asked, how do we balance all of this with the energy use and carbon footprint of all of these posts being saved?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, because just because something's happened digitally doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact. And it's a bit like, Zoom is not neutral. This will have there'll be a carbon impact of this. There's a carbon impact from every email. There's a carbon impact from every post. I mean, I don't actually know what the way to offset, for example, social media is. I know when I had my website redesigned during lockdown, I found someone who could host my website. It's in a green hosting, which means that the server that it's hosted on is run by renewable energy, so that I know, my website is, the hosting is green. Obviously that relies on the person who's also viewing the website, that where their energy source from is coming from renewable sources. It's a tricky one, because we are in this, a carbon intensive industry. We are, every country in the world is being propped up or supported by fossil fuels. And I don't know. I know that there are carbon offsetting tools that you can buy, for £5 a month to plant trees, for example. But you once carbon has been put into the environment, you can't, offsetting is sometimes a bit of a gimmick, maybe an excuse. And I know that organisations like Amazon are committing to being run by 100% renewable energy, I think by 2024. I know that those kind of large multinationals are making those pledges. Doesn't mean that they are going to. There's lots of greenwash happening. But I think you raise a really good point, Jenny, is actually nothing is neutral. Everything has an impact.
Brilliant, thanks, Genevieve. And I think also, before internet and obviously the mass use of computers, everything would have been printed. So that's this. I mean, it's much more. It is a bit better for the environment hosting things this way and posting on social media and stuff, because you haven't got that, you're not chopping down the trees to produce paper and printing and everything like that. So that's kind of just one kind of obvious thing that stood out to me. But like you said, there is still an impact. So I'm just having a look, and I can't see that we've got any more questions. So this is the last chance for everyone to submit anything. Otherwise, I will say a massive thank you to Genevieve for coming along today and talking to us all. Obviously, we have recorded this session, so we will be putting this up on East Suffolk Council's YouTube. There will be a link on our social media profiles linking to all of the workshops that we will be doing, because we're creating a playlist on YouTube, so you can see all of our funding workshops so far and our social media workshops. But I don't know if you've hang on, I think we might have just had another question sneak in. Oh no, it was just Jenny saying thank you. So yes, so we've got some lovely comments coming through saying that people have found this workshop really, really helpful. So thank you, Genevieve. And Joe, I don't know if you want to say anything before we go.
I've literally just typed out, thanks for coming, everyone. And, and thank you so much for Genevieve. That's really, really useful. As I say, we're going to do another workshop on e-commerce, which is just a deep dive into how to sell product using social media. But that was a brilliant overview of what's going on. I learned a couple of things, and that's always useful. Every day is a school day, especially where social media is concerned, because as everyone says, it changes so fast. Sometimes I go in the back end and just go, oh my God, I've got to learn it all again. So yeah, it is one of those things. You just got to keep learning and keep using it, and yeah, absolutely find your tribe, find your audience, talk to them, engage with them, and you'll get a lot more out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anyone is interested in joining any of our other workshops or come to any of our networking events, if you just go to thinklowestoft.co.uk and click our What's On section, you will be able to find out everything that's coming up for you. So we do also have some other things going on that aren't just for creatives, because Think Lowestoft is about regeneration in Lowestoft. But hopefully you'll find some of those things interesting. And if you click on the virtual hub link, there are also some resources on there for people to use. So please do feel free to use them. But thank you everyone for coming. Oh, Malcolm has just asked, any chance of a follow-up which shows practical examples?
Well, my response to that would be, if you've followed, make really good quality pictures, make a really good description of what your image is so that's accessible. Make sure your hashtags are capitalized. Find use the suggested times that Facebook suggests you to schedule. Then I can't imagine you'll need any follow-up. I mean, obviously that's not up to me, but just try it out. Just try some of the things. Really great images, make it accessible. Share, be generous, be kind with the kind of things that you're putting out there. Trial it out at different times, and I'm sure you'll be fine, Malcolm.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for inviting me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.